At the moment, one of the main instruments by which the EU pursues a big business, anti-worker, anti-environment, anti-people agenda is through its own trade mandate, which is incredibly predatory, exploitative of the raw materials, of the human material, particularly in lesser developed countries, but also increasingly tries to use trade deals, for example with the US, to bypass democratic processes, to engage in a race to the bottom in terms of workers' rights legislation, environmental legislation, social legislation, and also to enshrine corporate rights. And it's clear that, in the EU trade policy as it's currently carried out all around the world, human rights isn't a factor, isn't considered, except as they nod to the word human rights. The same in terms of environmental sustainability, and the only interests that matter are big business interests. So it's a huge, huge issue, and we need to have an alternative to say, no, we're opposed to this model of trade, and instead we put forward this alternative model of trade, which would actually work in the interests of people around the world and the environment. One thing that's very important is the question of democracy. Trade is currently a means by which they get around the limited democracy that we have. And so what the trade mandate proposes is that elected institutions, elected representatives at a national parliament level, at a European Parliament level, would be brought to the heart of initiating trade discussions, as opposed to it being the unelected commission, and also in the process of negotiation. Also an end to the secrecy. Secrecy is a weapon that they use to mean that people don't know what's going on, and then they shroud it in technological language. So an end to the secrecy. So they're about kind of method and process of trade negotiations, but then also apart from that, saying that trade should be in the interest of people. Human rights shouldn't be kind of an optional extra, something they just talk rhetoric about, but human rights should also be at the centre of trade policy. Food sovereignty should be at the centre of trade policy, and those kind of issues, I think, are the key things to highlight. People at home across Europe are under attack by the European Commission and the leading powers in Europe. That's mirrored around the world. And the trade policy is a crucial weapon in undermining people's interests, people's rights, and the environment's interests around the world, but also in Europe. If we don't mobilise, if people don't get to understand what's happening, for example with TAFTA, TTIP, the EU-US Free Trade Agreement, well then these are going to be used very significantly to make things even worse. And things have gotten quite bad. And so the only way we'll be able to have victories on these things if we educate ourselves, if we educate others, and then we get people to mobilise in protests, in meetings, in organisations. If we do that, then we can have a lot of power. Then we can win, then we can force them back. But if we don't, the problems will be quite severe.